I never thought I'd die on a Tuesday. Tuesday was supposed to be my favorite day. Biochemistry lab in the morning, lunch with my study group, and then quiet hours in the library before heading home to my tiny apartment where I'd make tea and watch documentaries until I fell asleep. Safe, predictable, mine. But on this particular Tuesday, as I walked across campus under a sky that threatened rain, I saw him coming toward me. Nathan Wells, 6'2", broad shoulders, captain of the swim team, and completely irrationally furious with me. "Hey, Morgan!" he called out, his voice carrying across the quad. I quickened my pace. We'd had enough confrontations in the past week to last a lifetime. As the teaching assistant for Professor Chen's advanced biochemistry course, I'd caught Nathan cheating on his midterm, copying answers from a cheat sheet tucked into his sleeve. I'd reported it, as was my duty. He'd failed the exam, and now his perfect GPA was in jeopardy, along with his scholarship. "Don't you dare walk away from me." I could hear him getting closer, his footsteps heavy on the pavement behind me. My heart pounded against my ribs as I clutched my laptop bag closer to my chest. "Just get to the science building. There will be people there. Professor Chen will be there." But Nathan caught up to me before I could reach safety, grabbing my arm so hard I knew it would bruise. "You ruined everything," he hissed, his face inches from mine. I could smell the coffee on his breath. "Do you know what you've done? I'm going to lose my scholarship, my spot on the team, all because you couldn't mind your own business." "You were cheating," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to look the other way." His grip tightened. Everyone else would have, but no, perfect little Morgan Lee, always playing by the rules. I tried to pull away. "Let go of me. People are watching." He glanced around at the few students crossing the quad, most huddled under umbrellas as the rain began to fall. Then he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You think I care who's watching? You've destroyed my life. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't return the favor." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain. There was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, something beyond anger, something cold and calculating and dangerous. "Nathan, please," I said, my voice barely audible. "It doesn't have to be like this. Talk to Professor Chen. Maybe you can retake the exam." He laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Oh, I tried that. Know what Chen said? That he trusts his TA's judgment implicitly. That's you, Morgan. He trusts you. Everyone trusts you." His hand moved from my arm to my throat, not squeezing, just resting there, a threat. "But I know better." I should have screamed. I should have kicked him or pushed him away. But fear paralyzed me, turning my limbs to stone. All I could do was stare into those cold blue eyes and wonder how someone I'd sat next to in class for 3 years could suddenly become a stranger. "I have nothing to lose now," he said softly. "Remember that." Then he released me and stepped back, his face clearing into the charming smile that had won him friends across campus, as if our encounter had been nothing more than a friendly chat. "See you around, Morgan." I watched him walk away, my legs trembling so badly I had to sit down on a nearby bench. Rain soaked through my coat, but I barely noticed. The warmth of his hand still lingered on my throat. I didn't tell anyone about Nathan's threat. What would I say? That the golden boy of Westlake University had threatened me? That I was afraid? No one would believe me. Nathan Wells came from money. His family had donated the new aquatic center last year. His father was on the board of trustees. He was untouchable. So I tried to forget about it. I focused on my thesis, on my lab work, on grading papers for Professor Chen. I stopped walking across the quad. I varied my schedule. I made sure I was never alone in the lab. But I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, the prickling sensation on the back of my neck when I walked to my car at night, the shadow that sometimes seemed to follow me, just at the edge of my vision. 3 days after our confrontation on the quad, I was working late in the biochemistry lab. Professor Chen had given me access to run some tests for my thesis, experiments that required careful monitoring over several hours. It was nearly midnight when I finally finished, the campus deserted except for a few security guards making their rounds. I packed up my samples, logged my results, and turned off the equipment. The lab was on the third floor of the Hadley Science Center, a modern building with keycard access and security cameras in the hallways. I should have felt safe. But as I locked the lab door behind me, that familiar sensation crept up my spine. Someone was watching me. I fumbled for my phone, meaning to call campus security for an escort to my car, when the lights in the hallway suddenly went out. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing down the empty corridor. "Is anyone there?" Silence greeted me. The emergency lights kicked in, casting an eerie blue glow that created more shadows than illumination. I started walking toward the stairs, my phone's flashlight cutting a path through the darkness. I was halfway to the stairwell when I heard it, footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming up behind me. "Security?" I called, spinning around. "Is that you?" No answer, just the sound of footsteps drawing closer. I ran, my heart hammered in my chest as I pushed through the door to the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. 3 floors down, then out to the parking lot where my ancient Honda waited. I had pepper spray on my keychain. I'd be fine once I reached my car. I burst through the exit door into the rainy night, gasping for breath. The parking lot was dimly lit, most of the spaces empty at this hour. My car sat alone near the back, where grad students were relegated to park. I was fumbling with my keys when I heard the door open behind me. "Morgan." Nathan's voice, calm, almost friendly. I turned slowly to face him, keys clutched between my fingers like makeshift brass knuckles, the way they'd taught us in that self-defense workshop freshman year. "What do you want, Nathan?" I tried to sound brave, but my voice shook. He was soaked from the rain, his blonde hair plastered to his forehead, his expensive jacket clinging to his shoulders. He held something in his right hand, but I couldn't make out what it was in the dim light. "I just want to talk," he said, stepping closer. "About what happened." "There's nothing to talk about." I backed up until I felt my car behind me. "You cheated. I reported it. End of story." "See, that's where you're wrong." Another step closer. "It's not the end, it's just the beginning." The object in his hand caught the light, something metallic. A knife? I couldn't tell. "Stay back," I warned. "I've called security." He smiled, that same charming smile that had adorned recruitment brochures and alumni magazines. "No, you haven't. Your phone's in your pocket. And anyway, Rodriguez is on duty tonight. He always takes his dinner break at midnight. Won't be back for at least 30 minutes. How did he know the security guard's schedule? How long had he been planning this? "Nathan, please," I said, hating the pleading note in my voice. "Think about what you're doing. This isn't you." "That's where you're wrong again, Morgan. This is me, the real me, not the version I've been pretending to be." He was close enough now that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy. You know what the worst part is? I didn't even need to cheat. I know the material. I just ran out of time. Had a meet that morning. Didn't study enough. "Then why?" "Because it was easier," he snapped, sudden anger distorting his features. "Because that's what I do, Morgan. I take the easy way, and it's always worked before. Until you—" I should have run then. Should have screamed or fought or done something, but I was frozen, trapped between my car and this man I'd never really known. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't. "Not really." "No, you're not." His voice was soft again, reasonable. "But you will be." The metallic object flashed as he raised his hand. Not a knife, I realized with absurd relief. A syringe. "What is that?" I asked, panic finally breaking through my paralysis. I raised my hands to push him away. "Just a little something from the lab, quite the cocktail, actually. Untraceable, will look like a heart attack." He caught my wrist easily as I tried to strike him. "Don't worry, it won't hurt. Much?" I screamed then, finally, but the sound was swallowed by the empty night and the relentless rain. Nathan's hand clamped over my mouth as he pushed me against the car. "Shh," he soothed, as if comforting a child. "It'll be over soon. Then I can get back on track." A tragic accident. The promising young TA working too hard, stress-induced cardiac event. Such a shame. The needle pierced my skin before I could stop him, a sharp sting in my neck followed by a burning sensation that spread rapidly through my veins. Almost immediately, my limbs began to feel heavy, my thoughts clouding. "Why?" I managed to gasp as he stepped back, watching me slide down the side of the car to the wet pavement. He shrugged, pocketing the empty syringe. Because you were in my way. Because you couldn't just mind your own business. Because I can. The rain fell on my face as I lay there, unable to move, my heart racing, then slowing, my breath coming in short gasps. Nathan crouched beside me, checking my pulse with clinical detachment. "It was nothing personal, Morgan," he said, his voice fading in and out as darkness crept in from the edges of my vision. "Just bad luck for you. Wrong place, wrong time." As consciousness slipped away, my last thought wasn't of fear or anger or even regret. It was a strange, detached curiosity. How could someone get away with this? Then nothing but darkness and silence, forever. Until it wasn't. White ceiling, beeping machines. The smell of antiseptic and something else, flowers maybe. These were the first sensations that filtered through the fog in my mind. I blinked, trying to bring the world into focus. My body felt strange, lighter somehow, but also awkward, as if I'd forgotten how to exist in physical form. "She's waking up!" Someone squeezed my hand, a woman's voice achingly familiar, and I turned my head, the movement requiring more effort than it should. A face swam into view, round cheeks, warm brown eyes brimming with tears, black hair streaked with gray, pulled back in a tight bun. "Mom?" I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my voice emerging as nothing more than a rasp. "Don't try to talk yet, sweetie," Mom said, pressing a cool hand to my forehead. "The doctor said it might take time." Doctor? Was I in a hospital? The last thing I remembered was Nathan, the parking lot, the syringe, dying. Panic seized me. I tried to sit up, but gentle hands pressed me back down. "Easy now," came another voice, deeper. My father appeared on the other side of the bed, his face haggard with exhaustion but lit with relief. "You're safe. You're okay." "What?" I managed, the single word scraping painfully against my throat. A third figure stepped into view, a woman in a white coat, her silver-rimmed glasses perched on a narrow nose. "Hello, Eliza. I'm Dr. Patel. You've been in a medically induced coma for nearly 2 weeks. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Eliza? Who was Eliza? I looked from the doctor to my parents, confusion clouding my thoughts. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Oh, Lizzie," she said. "We thought we'd lost you." Lizzie, not Morgan. Something was very, very wrong. The doctor checked my vitals, explaining that I'd been in a car accident. Head trauma, internal bleeding, multiple surgeries. They'd placed me in a coma to allow my brain to heal. "You're lucky to be alive," she said, making notes on a tablet. "Your parents have barely left your side." My parents, but they weren't my parents, not Morgan's parents. Morgan's mother had died of breast cancer during her sophomore year of college. Her father lived in Arizona with his new wife. And yet, I recognized these people, knew them, loved them, had memories of them that weren't Morgan's memories at all. "Rest now," Dr. Patel said, patting my arm. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." After she left, my mother, Eliza's mother, leaned in close, still clutching my hand. "Oh, Lizzie," she whispered, "my baby girl. When they called us about the accident, I've never been so scared." Accident? No, not an accident. Murder. Nathan had murdered me. But who was me now? Recovery was slow. Physically, my body, Eliza's body, had been through significant trauma, broken ribs, punctured lung, fractured femur, traumatic brain injury. I graduated from lying in bed to sitting up, from wheelchair to walker to cane. Mentally, the adjustment was even more challenging. I had 2 sets of memories, 2 identities battling for dominance. I was Morgan Lee, 24, biochemistry PhD candidate at Westlake University. I was also Eliza Chen, 22, pre-med student at Eastridge College. Morgan was dead, killed by Nathan Wells in a rainy parking lot. Eliza had nearly died in a car accident, hit by a drunk driver who ran a red light. Both lives felt real. Both sets of memories were vivid and detailed. In quiet moments, I could recall the song I danced to at Morgan's high school prom, Vienna by Billy Joel, and the name of Eliza's childhood dog, Mochi, a Shiba Inu who lived to the ripe old age of 15. The doctors called it confabulation, false memories created by my injured brain to fill in gaps. They assured my concerned parents that it was temporary, that as I healed, I'd let go of these Morgan memories and fully return to being their daughter. But I knew better. This wasn't confabulation. This was reincarnation, possession, a bizarre twist of metaphysical fate. Whatever it was real. I had died as Morgan Lee and somehow impossibly awakened as Eliza Chen. And Nathan Wells had gotten away with murder. How are you feeling today, Eliza? Dr. Macy, my neuropsychologist, smiled kindly from across her desk. It had been 6 months since I'd awakened in Eliza's body. Physically, I was almost fully recovered. I still had a slight limp from the femur fracture and sometimes experienced headaches if I pushed myself too hard, but I was mobile, functional, alive. Better, I said truthfully. The headaches are less frequent. She nodded, making a note. And the other issue, the identity confusion? I'd learned to be careful what I shared with the medical team. Early on, I'd been too honest, insisting that I was Morgan Lee trapped in Eliza Chen's body. That had led to psychiatric evaluations, antipsychotic medications, and worried whispers about post-traumatic stress and dissociative disorders. Now I knew to play along. Much improved, I said with a smile I'd practiced in the mirror. Those Morgan memories feel more like a dream now, less real. Dr. Macy beamed. That's excellent progress, Eliza. I think we can reduce our sessions to once a month. And if things continue to improve, perhaps we can discuss weaning you off the antipsychotics. I nodded gratefully. The medications made me foggy, dulled my thinking, and I needed to think clearly for what I was planning. Because while I was outwardly adapting to life as Eliza Chen, returning to college part-time, reconnecting with Eliza's friends, trying to build a life, inwardly, I remained Morgan Lee. And Morgan had unfinished business. Nathan Wells had murdered me and gotten away with it. No one had suspected foul play in Morgan's death. According to the newspaper articles I'd found online, teaching assistant Morgan Lee had suffered a sudden cardiac arrest in the parking lot of Hadley Science Center. A tragic loss, a promising young scientist taken too soon. Nathan had been interviewed for one of the articles, expressing shock and sadness at his TA's untimely passing. She was brilliant, he'd said, always willing to help students. She'll be deeply missed. The perfect cover, just as he'd planned. But he hadn't planned on me coming back. Life as Eliza Chen had its advantages. While Morgan had been a perpetually broke grad student living on ramen and coffee, Eliza came from money. Her father, David Chen, was a successful investment banker. Her mother, Grace, was a real estate agent specializing in luxury properties. They lived in a spacious home in an exclusive neighborhood of Edgewater, a city about 30 miles from where Westlake University was located. Eliza had been their only child, cherished and provided for. Her trust fund had already paid for her undergraduate education and would see her through medical school too. At least that had been the plan before the accident. Now, her parents were just grateful she was alive. When I, as Eliza, had asked about taking a gap year before returning to pre-med studies, they'd agreed immediately. "Whatever you need, sweetheart," Grace had said, kissing my forehead. "Your health comes first." What I needed was time. Time to heal fully. Time to adjust to this new reality. Time to plan. Because Nathan Wells was still out there, still living his life as if nothing had happened, still getting away with murder. I spent my days in physical therapy and my nights researching. Using Eliza's laptop, I scoured social media and news sites for information about Nathan. I learned that he had indeed kept his scholarship after all. Professor Chen had caught him cheating a second time just 2 weeks after Morgan's death and expelled him from the class, but the swim coach had intervened, too valuable to the team apparently. Nathan had graduated from Westlake with honors the previous spring. Now he was in a prestigious MD-PhD program at Eastridge Medical Center, the same hospital where Eliza had been treated after her accident. In fact, according to his Instagram, he was doing a research rotation in the neuroscience department, just one floor below the rehabilitation unit where I'd spent weeks relearning how to walk. We had been in the same building, passing like ships in the night, neither aware of the other's presence. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nathan's social media portrayed the perfect life of a successful young doctor in training. Photos of him in scrubs, in the lab, at charity events. Always that same charming smile. Always that same facade of the golden boy. Only I knew what lurked beneath that perfect exterior. And slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. A way to make Nathan Wells pay for what he'd done to Morgan Lee. But to execute it, I would need to become someone else entirely. Neither Morgan nor Eliza, but someone new. Someone with the confidence, the resources, and the ruthlessness to bring down a killer who thought he'd gotten away with the perfect crime. I would need to be reborn, just as I had been that day in the hospital. Not as a victim this time, but as an avenger. Miss Chen, I must say I'm surprised by this decision. Mr. Goldstein, my parents' financial advisor, peered at me over his reading glasses. We sat in his plush downtown office, the city skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. I understand your concern, I said, crossing my legs and maintaining steady eye contact. But I've given this a great deal of thought. He glanced down at the papers spread across his mahogany desk. You're talking about accessing nearly a quarter of your trust fund. That's over $2 million. Money that was intended for your education and a future security. I'm aware of the amount, Mr. Goldstein. My voice was calm, measured. Eliza's voice, but with Morgan's determination. And I still have more than enough left for medical school, should I choose to return to that path? May I ask what this withdrawal is for? Property investment? A business venture? I smiled. Let's call it a passion project. In the year since I'd awakened in Eliza's body, I'd done more than just recover physically. I'd studied Eliza, her mannerisms, her speech patterns, her relationships. I'd perfected the art of being her, while keeping Morgan's memories and goals hidden beneath the surface. To the world, I was Eliza Chen, wealthy, privileged, recovering accident victim who developed a new interest in science after her traumatic brain injury. To my parents, I was their miracle child. Different, perhaps, but still their beloved daughter. Only I knew the truth, that Morgan Lee lived on, burning with a singular purpose: justice. Mr. Goldstein sighed, removing his glasses and polishing them with a monogrammed handkerchief. Your parents have given you sole discretion over the trust since your 21st birthday, so legally there's nothing preventing this withdrawal. But as your family's advisor for over 20 years, I feel obligated to express my concern. Duly noted, I said, reaching for the papers. Where do I sign? With more reluctance than enthusiasm, he showed me where to place my signature. Eliza's signature, which I'd practiced for months until it was indistinguishable from the one on her driver's license and passport. 2 hours later, I walked out of the bank with access to more money than Morgan Lee had ever possessed in her entire life. Money that would fund the next phase of my plan. Miss Chen, Dr. Winters will see you now. The receptionist ushered me into a sleek office where a middle-aged woman with a platinum blonde bob and impeccable suit waited behind a glass desk. Eliza, please have a seat, Dr. Winters said, gesturing to a chair across from her. I've reviewed the proposal your assistant sent over. I must say it's quite ambitious. Dr. Abigail Winters was the Dean of Sciences at Westlake University, Morgan's former school. She had never met Eliza Chen before, which made this meeting both risky and necessary. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me, I said, setting my designer handbag on the floor beside me. Another thing that distinguished Eliza from Morgan, the ability to afford luxury items without batting an eye. I know it's an unconventional request. Dr. Winters nodded, tapping manicured fingers on her desk. To say the least, a $2 million donation for a new biochemistry research lab is extremely generous. But you're asking for quite specific terms. I crossed my legs, smoothing the skirt of my Chanel suit. The Chen Family Foundation believes in supporting scientific education and research. My family has typically focused our philanthropy on medical institutions, but my accident has given me a new perspective. So, I understand. I'm glad to see you've recovered well. Her eyes were shrewd behind her designer glasses. But I'm curious why someone with no connection to Westlake would choose us for such a specific donation. I'd anticipated this question. Your biochemistry department has an excellent reputation, and frankly, the proposal allows me to honor someone I've come to admire greatly. Morgan Lee. Dr. Winters' expression softened slightly. I knew her, brilliant student. Her death was a terrible loss to the scientific community. Yes, I said, swallowing past the lump in my throat. From everything I've read about her work, she was extraordinary. She was, Dr. Winters agreed, but I'm still not clear on your connection to her. There isn't one directly, I lied smoothly. But after my accident, I became fascinated with biochemistry, particularly the kind of neuropharmacological research Morgan was conducting. Her published papers helped me understand what happened to my own brain. I'd like her work to continue. It wasn't entirely a lie. Morgan's research had focused on neurochemical pathways, the very ones Nathan had exploited to kill her so effectively that no one suspected murder. I see. Dr. Winters leaned back in her chair. Well, your terms are unusual but not unreasonable. A new state-of-the-art lab dedicated to Morgan Lee's memory with specific equipment for neurochemical research. She tapped on her tablet. And you want it built in the Hadley Science Center, specifically in the space currently occupied by Lab 3B? That's correct. Lab 3B, where Morgan had spent her final hours alive. And the scholarship for disadvantaged graduate students pursuing biochemistry PhDs? A fitting tribute, I think. Morgan herself came from limited means, as I understand it. Dr. Winters studied me for a long moment. Miss Chen, forgive my bluntness, but donations of this magnitude usually come with some sort of recognition. A plaque, a naming opportunity. You've specifically requested anonymity. I smiled. I'm not interested in recognition, Dr. Winters, only impact. Very commendable, she said, though her tone suggested she remained skeptical. There's just one issue with the location. Lab 3B is currently used by our MD-PhD program in partnership with Eastridge Medical Center. We'd need to relocate those researchers. My pulse quickened. That shouldn't be a problem, should it? Surely with a $2 million donation, you could find alternative space for them? Oh, certainly, Dr. Winters said with a dismissive wave. It's just a matter of timing and logistics. The lead researcher, Dr. Wells, is quite particular about his workspace. Dr. Wells. Nathan had completed his degree and taken a faculty position at Westlake while I'd been planning. Of course he had. The scene of his crime, the place where he'd gotten away with murder, he'd never leave it behind. Too arrogant, too confident in his own impunity. Dr. Wells will need to adapt, I said, my voice hardening slightly before I caught myself. That is, I'm sure a rising star like Dr. Wells would understand the importance of supporting the next generation of scientists. Dr. Winters raised an eyebrow at my tone but nodded. I'm sure we can work something out. The university would be grateful for your generous donation, Miss Chen. I'll have our development office draw up the formal agreement. I stood, extending my hand. Excellent. I look forward to breaking ground on the Morgan Lee Memorial Laboratory. As I walked out of the building into the bright sunshine, I allowed myself a small smile. Phase 1 of my plan was in motion. I would turn the very lab where Morgan had spent her final hours into a memorial to her legacy and, in the process, disrupt Nathan Wells' carefully constructed new life. But that was just the beginning. Eliza, honey, are you sure about this? My mother, Eliza's mother, looked concerned as she helped me pack up the last of my belongings from my childhood bedroom. I'd leased an apartment in downtown Edgewater, close to Westlake University, where I'd be overseeing the construction of the new lab. I'm sure, Mom, I said, carefully wrapping a framed photo of Eliza with her parents. I need my independence to figure out who I am now. After the accident, I didn't say, but it hung in the air between us. Grace Chen sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. You've changed so much, Lizzie. Sometimes I hardly recognize you. If only she knew how right she was. The accident changed me, I said, which was both true and false in equal measure. I'm still figuring out what that means. She reached out to stroke my hair, Eliza's hair, which I'd grown out from the pixie cut she'd had before the accident. Now it fell in dark waves past my shoulders, more like Morgan's had been. I just worry, Grace said softly. The trust fund, the move, this sudden interest in biochemistry, it's all so different from your plans before. I know, I said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. But different doesn't mean bad. I'm still me, Mom, just evolving. She squeezed my hand. Your father and I are proud of you, you know. The donation to Westlake, the scholarship program. It's very generous. It felt right, I said simply. After everything I've been through, I want to give back, to make a difference. What I didn't say was exactly what kind of difference I intended to make. My new apartment was on the top floor of a renovated warehouse in the trendy Riverside district. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the river and the university campus beyond. The space was open, industrial, nothing like either Morgan's cramped graduate housing or Eliza's traditional childhood home. It was neutral territory, a place where I could be neither completely Morgan nor completely Eliza, but something new. I set up one bedroom as my personal space, with a king-sized bed and tasteful furniture that suited Eliza's refined aesthetic. The other bedroom I converted into an office lab with equipment that would have made Morgan salivate: a high-powered microscope, a small but efficient centrifuge, chemical storage cabinets, and a specialized refrigerator for samples. None of it suspicious on its own. Eliza was, after all, supposedly interested in biochemistry now. She was funding a major lab renovation. It made sense she'd want to understand the science better. The living area I kept minimal, with sleek furniture and abstract art. But in my private bathroom, hidden behind a false panel in the medicine cabinet, I kept a shrine to Morgan Lee. Newspaper clippings about her death. Printouts of her research papers. A photograph of me, smiling in front of the Hadley Science Center on her first day as a teaching assistant. "I haven't forgotten you," I whispered to the photo. "I haven't forgotten what he did." The final touch to my new life was a home office setup that would have made any tech enthusiast jealous. Multiple monitors, server-grade computing power, secure VPN connections, and most importantly, specialized software for monitoring social media, news outlets, and academic publications, all focused on tracking one person, Nathan Wells. From this command center, I would watch and wait and plan, because timing would be everything. I needed to understand Nathan's new life completely before I could begin to dismantle it. And dismantle it I would, piece by carefully constructed piece, until there was nothing left but the truth. "Dr. Wells, if I could have a moment of your time?" I stood in the doorway of Lab 3B, watching as Nathan Wells looked up from his microscope. He'd aged in the 2 years since he'd murdered Morgan Lee. Filled out a bit, grown a closely cropped beard that suited him, developed a few fine lines around his eyes. Success looked good on him. For now. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but distracted. He didn't recognize me, of course. To him, I was just an elegantly dressed woman interrupting his work. "Eliza Chen," I said, stepping into the lab and extending my hand. "I'm the donor funding the renovation of this space." His expression shifted instantly from mild annoyance to calculated charm. "Miss Chen, of course. I've heard so much about your generous contribution." He shook my hand, his grip firm and warm. "Nathan Wells, I'm sure Dean Winters mentioned I've been displaced by your project." The same hand that had held a syringe to Morgan's neck. The same voice that had whispered, "It was nothing personal," as she died. I fought back a wave of nausea and maintained my pleasant smile. "She did mention that, yes. I hope it hasn't been too disruptive to your research." He gestured around the lab where equipment was already being packed into crates. "Change is inevitable in academic science, and they've given me a larger space on the 4th floor, so I can hardly complain." "How gracious of you," I said, moving deeper into the room, running my fingers along a lab bench where Morgan had once worked. "I understand you knew Morgan Lee, the researcher this lab will memorialize?" A flicker of something, surprise, unease, crossed his features before his mask of affability returned. "Yes, actually. She was my TA during my undergraduate studies. Brilliant scientist. Such a tragedy, her passing." "Cardiac arrest, wasn't it?" I asked, watching him closely. "So young for heart failure." "Some genetic condition, I believe," he said smoothly. "Undiagnosed cardiomyopathy or something similar. I'm not a cardiologist." "No, you're a neuropharmacologist," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "Focusing on the effects of designer compounds on neural pathways. Similar to Morgan's work, in fact." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "You've done your research." "I make it a point to know where my money is going, Dr. Wells." I wandered to the window, the same window Morgan had looked out of on her last night alive. "This lab has history. Important work was done here, and more important work will be done, thanks to your donation, he said smoothly, moving to stand beside me. Close enough that I could smell his cologne. Still that same woodsy scent. My heart rate accelerated, fight or flight instinct kicking in. Tell me, Dr. Wells, I said, working to keep my voice steady. Do you ever think about Morgan Lee? About her potential cut short? He studied me, curiosity evident in his expression. You seem to have a personal interest in someone you never met. I turned to face him fully. As I told Dean Winters, Morgan's research helped me understand my own condition after my accident. I feel a connection to her. Accident. Car crash. Traumatic brain injury. I tapped my temple lightly, changed my perspective on many things, made me appreciate the fragility of life. He nodded, his clinical gaze assessing me with new interest. Frontal lobe injuries can indeed cause personality changes, altered priorities. Fascinating from a neurological perspective. Is that how you see people, Dr. Wells? As fascinating neurological case studies? I kept my tone light, curious, even as rage simmered beneath the surface. He laughed, a charming sound that once might have fooled me. Occupational hazard, I'm afraid. But no, I see people as people, Miss Chen. Complex, surprising, and yes, sometimes fascinating. Please call me Eliza, I stepped away from the window from him. I should let you get back to your packing. I just wanted to see the space before construction begins. I paused at the door. I'm organizing a small reception next month to announce the lab dedication and scholarship program. I do hope you'll attend. He inclined his head. I wouldn't miss it. As I walked away, I could feel his eyes on my back, evaluating, reassessing. Good. I wanted him intrigued. I wanted him watching me. Because when you're watching someone else, you don't notice the trap closing around you. The Morgan Lee Memorial Laboratory and Scholarship Fund marks a new chapter in Westlake University's commitment to groundbreaking biochemical research, Dean Winters announced to the gathered crowd. And we have one person to thank for making this possible, our extraordinarily generous donor, Miss Eliza Chen. Applause filled the elegantly decorated atrium of the Hadley Science Center. I stepped up to the podium, dressed in a midnight blue gown that highlighted Eliza's naturally graceful figure, which had fully recovered from the accident. Thank you, Dean Winters, I said, surveying the crowd of academics, university administrators, and local dignitaries. My parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride at their daughter's philanthropic gesture, and there near the back stood Nathan Wells, nursing a glass of champagne, watching me. My journey to this moment began with tragedy, I continued. 2 years ago, I was in a devastating car accident that nearly claimed my life. During my recovery, I became fascinated with the biochemistry of the brain, how trauma affects neural pathways, how memory works, how we become who we are. I paused, making eye contact with various attendees. That's when I discovered the groundbreaking work of Morgan Lee, a brilliant PhD candidate whose life was cut tragically short right here in this building. Morgan's research on neuropharmacological pathways helped me understand my own healing process. And though I never had the privilege of meeting her, I felt a profound connection to her work and her legacy. Another pause as I turned a page in my prepared remarks. The Morgan Lee Memorial Laboratory will continue the innovative research she began, and the Scholarship Fund will ensure that students with limited financial resources, as Morgan herself had, will have the opportunity to pursue their scientific passions without the burden of economic hardship. I looked directly at Nathan now. Morgan Lee's life mattered, her work mattered, and while we cannot bring her back, we can ensure that her contributions to science are not forgotten. The rest of my speech was met with enthusiastic applause, followed by the ceremonial uncovering of the architectural renderings for the new lab. Afterward, during the reception, I circulated among the guests, accepting congratulations and discussing the project with various faculty members. I was speaking with a biochemistry professor when Nathan approached, 2 champagne flutes in hand. A remarkable gesture, he said, offering me one of the glasses, to someone you never met. I accepted the champagne, careful not to touch his fingers as I took the glass. Sometimes we feel connections that transcend conventional relationships. Indeed, he clinked his glass against mine, to connections. I smiled but didn't drink. Neither did he. You don't trust me, he observed, his tone amused. I don't know you well enough to trust or distrust you, Dr. Wells, I replied evenly. Yet you've researched my work extensively, knew exactly what lab space to request for your renovation, seemed particularly interested in my connection to Morgan Lee. His eyes, those cold blue eyes that had watched Morgan die, studied me intently. Curious. I'm a thorough person. So it seems. He took a small sip of his champagne, as if proving it wasn't poisoned. You know, I've been thinking about our conversation in the lab. Your accident, the brain injury. Would you consider letting me run some tests? Purely for research purposes, of course. The neural pathways involved in identity formation after TBI are fascinating. A chill ran through me. You want to study me, Dr. Wells? I want to understand you, he corrected. There's something unique about your case. If only he knew how right he was. Perhaps another time, I said, setting down my untouched champagne. I should circulate, but I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other as the lab construction progresses. He inclined his head. I look forward to it. As I moved away to greet other guests, I could feel his gaze following me, the hunter watching potential prey. But what he didn't realize was that in this scenario, he wasn't the predator. He was the experiment. The first phase of demolition begins tomorrow, I told Nathan, as we stood in the empty lab 3B. I wanted to make sure you'd removed everything you needed. It had been 3 weeks since the dedication ceremony. In that time, I'd made it my business to insert myself into Nathan's professional sphere. As the project's benefactor, I had every right to be involved in the transition process. And Nathan, ever the opportunist, had clearly decided that cultivating a relationship with a wealthy donor could only benefit his career. All clear, he confirmed, gesturing to the bare countertops and empty cabinets. My team has relocated everything to the 4th floor, though I admit I'll miss this view. He nodded toward the window overlooking the campus quad, the same view Morgan had seen on her last night alive. Progress requires sacrifice, I said, running my fingers along a scratch in one of the lab benches. Morgan had made that scratch, I remembered, when a heavy microscope had slipped as she was moving it. A philosophy I live by, Nathan agreed, watching me with that calculated intensity he'd developed. You know, my offer still stands. I'd love to include you in our current study on cognitive restructuring after traumatic brain events. I smiled, shaking my head. I'm a benefactor, Dr. Wells, not a lab rat. Nathan, please, he corrected, and all scientific subjects are participants, not rats. Even the ones who don't know they're being studied? Something flickered in his eyes, wariness perhaps. Informed consent is the cornerstone of ethical research. Is it? I moved closer to him, close enough to see the faint scar on his jawline that hadn't been there when he killed Morgan. And have you always been ethical in your research, Nathan? His posture stiffened almost imperceptibly before he relaxed into a casual stance. Science advances through rigorous adherence to ethical standards, he recited, as if reading from a textbook. Without ethics, we're not scientists, we're dangerous. Dangerous, I repeated softly. Yes, I imagine unethical scientists could be very dangerous indeed. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us before Nathan cleared his throat. Well, I should get back to my new lab. We're setting up an experiment that requires precise timing. Of course. I stepped back, giving him space to leave. Oh, and Nathan? I've decided to take a more active role in the construction oversight. You'll be seeing quite a bit more of me around the department. He paused at the door. Lucky department. After he left, I stood alone in the empty lab where Morgan had died. Where I had died. The memory of that night was still vivid. The rain, the fear, the betrayal, the burning sensation as the lethal compound entered my bloodstream. Phase 1 complete, I whispered to the empty room. He's curious, wary, beginning to wonder who I really am. Now it was time for Phase 2. Professor Alvarez, I'm Eliza Chen. I believe Dean Winters mentioned I'd be stopping by. The elderly biochemist looked up from his computer, blinking owlishly behind thick glasses. Ah, Miss Chen. Yes, the dean mentioned you had some questions about Morgan Lee's research. I settled into the chair across from his cluttered desk. Professor Fernando Alvarez had been Morgan's thesis advisor. and before that, her undergraduate mentor. If anyone knew the details of her work, it would be him. Thank you for making time, I said. As the donor funding the lab in Morgan's memory, I'm trying to understand the full scope of her research to ensure the new facility properly honors her legacy. He nodded, removing his glasses to clean them on his lab coat. A noble endeavor. Morgan was special. The kind of student you might get once in a career if you're lucky. So I've heard. I understand she was working on neuropharmacological pathways, specifically related to compounds that can cross the blood-brain barrier? Alvarez looked surprised at my specific knowledge. Yes, that's right. Her thesis focused on designer compounds that could target specific neural receptors without triggering the usual protective responses, potentially groundbreaking for treating certain neurological conditions. Like inducing cardiac arrest that looked natural, I thought grimly. Was she close to any breakthroughs before she died? Hard to say, Alvarez sighed. Her final experiments showed promise, but the data wasn't conclusive. After her death, we tried to reconstruct her work, but some of her research notebooks went missing, he said, a note of old frustration in his voice. Critical information about compound formulations, experimental protocols. We searched everywhere, but they never turned up. My pulse quickened. That seems convenient. Convenient? Alvarez frowned. I just mean, if someone wanted to continue her research independently, those notebooks would be valuable. He shook his head. The university has strict policies about intellectual property. Any developments from Morgan's work would belong to Westlake. No one would benefit from taking them. No one except someone who wanted to hide evidence of how to create an untraceable poison. Professor, did Morgan ever mention having any conflicts with students? Anyone who might have resented her? Alvarez looked startled by the question. What an odd thing to ask. No, Morgan was well-liked, respected. She was firm but fair with the undergraduates she taught. I leaned forward. What about Nathan Wells? I understand he was one of her students. Nathan? Alvarez's bushy eyebrows rose. Well, yes, there was some issue with an exam, as I recall. Morgan caught him cheating, reported it. Standard procedure. Why do you ask? Just trying to understand the dynamics of the department, I said smoothly. Dr. Wells is involved with the new lab space. His research was displaced by our renovation. Ah, I see. Alvarez replaced his glasses. Well, that's ancient history now. Nathan has become one of our rising stars. His work on neural pathway manipulation is quite innovative. I bet it is, I thought. Would you say his research builds on Morgan's in any way? Alvarez considered this. There are certainly similarities in their focus areas. Nathan's approach is more applied, perhaps, less theoretical than Morgan's tended to be, but that's natural as science progresses. Or as someone steals research and develops it for their own purposes. One last question, Professor. Did anything about Morgan's death seem unusual to you? Given her young age, her good health? His expression clouded. It was shocking, certainly, but cardiac events can happen to anyone, Miss Chen. Even the young and healthy. Morgan worked long hours, was under considerable stress with her thesis deadline approaching. It's tragic, but not medically implausible. Of course, I said, rising to leave. Thank you for your time, Professor. You've been most helpful. As I walked back across campus, pieces were falling into place. Nathan had stolen Morgan's research notebooks after killing her, not just to cover his tracks, but to advance his own work. The innovative approaches in his current research were likely built on Morgan's stolen intellectual property. The perfect crime. He'd eliminated a witness to his cheating, acquired valuable research, and built his career on the foundation of his victim's work. But his perfect crime had one fatal flaw. His victim had come back. Eliza, what a pleasant surprise! Nathan looked up from his computer as I entered his new lab on the 4th floor. The space was larger than his previous one, with state-of-the-art equipment and a team of 3 graduate students working at various stations. I hope I'm not interrupting, I said. I was in the building checking on the construction progress and thought I'd see your new setup. Not at all. He stood, gesturing for me to enter further. Let me give you the tour. The lab was impressive, sleek, modern, expensive. The kind of facility that required substantial grant funding or institutional support. the kind of facility Morgan could only have dreamed of working in. This is our primary research area, Nathan explained, leading me past benches where his graduate students pretended not to eavesdrop. We're currently investigating targeted neurochemical interventions for treatment-resistant depression. Fascinating, I murmured, noting the molecular models displayed on several screens. Compounds similar to those in Morgan's research. And over here, I indicated a separate glass-enclosed room at the back of the lab. Ah, that's my private workspace, Nathan said, for more specialized experiments. May I? I was already moving toward the door. He hesitated fractionally before following. Of course. The inner lab was a researcher's dream. Specialized equipment, precise environmental controls, and a secured cabinet system that undoubtedly contained compounds that would be strictly regulated. This was where the real work happened. Morgan would have given anything for a space like this. Impressive, I said, turning slowly to take it all in. My eyes landed on a shelf of laboratory notebooks, bound hardcover volumes with dated spines. Among the newer ones were several that looked older, more worn. You keep physical records? How charmingly old school. Digital systems fail, Nathan said, moving subtly to position himself between me and the shelf. And some insights come from the process of writing by hand. The brain-hand connection stimulates different neural pathways than typing. I've heard that. I stepped closer to the shelf, noting how Nathan tensed. These older notebooks, they look well used. My undergraduate work, he said quickly. I'm somewhat of a pack rat when it comes to research notes. I reached past him and ran my finger along the spines. Most were labeled with dates and project names in Nathan's handwriting, but 3 volumes near the end had no external markings. And these? I asked innocently. Reference materials, he said, his voice tight. Look, Eliza, while I appreciate your interest, some of this research is proprietary, confidential. I withdrew my hand, smiling apologetically. Of course, I didn't mean to pry. The scientist in me gets curious. The scientist in you? His eyebrow raised. I thought you were pre-med before your accident. I contained multitudes, I said lightly, moving away from the shelf. Speaking of which, I brought you something. I reached into my bag and withdrew a slim folder. The final architectural plans for the Morgan Lee lab. I thought you might be interested, given your connection to her. He took the folder, flipping through it with apparent interest. Quite ambitious. The equipment specifications are impressive. Only the best for Morgan's legacy, I said, watching his face carefully. You know, the strangest thing happened during the demolition yesterday. The construction crew found a hidden panel behind one of the storage cabinets. A small space just big enough to hide something you wouldn't want found during a routine search. Nathan's fingers stilled on the plans. Is that so? Empty, unfortunately. But it made me wonder what secrets that old lab might have held. His eyes met mine, calculating, wary. Old buildings are full of quirks. Probably nothing significant. Probably, I agreed, retrieving the folder from his hands. Well, I should let you get back to work. Oh, and Nathan? The dedication ceremony for the completed lab will be in 3 months. I'd like you to speak. About Morgan, her work, your admiration for her. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I'd be honored. As I left the lab, I could feel the weight of his stare. He was suspicious now. Good. Let him wonder. Let him worry. Let him feel a fraction of the fear Morgan had felt on that rainy night. The game had truly begun. Dr. Wells seems quite interested in you, my mother observed, sipping her tea at our regular Sunday brunch. He couldn't take his eyes off you at the fundraising gala last night. I focused on cutting my avocado toast into precise triangles. 6 months had passed since my first visit to Nathan's new lab. 6 months of careful maneuvering, of inserting myself into his professional and social circles. 6 months of watching him watch me, his scientific curiosity battling with growing suspicion. Nathan is interested in my brain, not me, I said. To him, I'm a walking TBI case study. That's not how a man looks at a case study, Grace Chen said with motherly certainty. And he's quite handsome, successful. Your father was impressed with his research when they spoke. I set down my knife, fighting a wave of nausea. The idea of Nathan Wells becoming close to Eliza's family, to my family now, was grotesque. Mom, please. There's nothing between Dr. Wells and me. He's a colleague, nothing more. She raised an eyebrow. You've never called any of your other donation recipients colleagues, or by their first names. The Morgan Lee Project is different, I said, which was true in ways she could never comprehend. I'm more personally invested. Grace reached across the table to take my hand. Lizzie, it's been nearly 3 years since your accident. Your father and I are thrilled with your recovery, your new interests, but we worry that you're not living fully. You don't date. You've drifted away from your old friends. You spend all your time with scientists and academics twice your age. If only she knew the truth, that her daughter's body now housed the consciousness of a murdered woman bent on exposing a killer. That would go over well at Sunday brunch. I'm finding my way, Mom, I said gently. The accident changed me. I'm still figuring out who I am now. She squeezed my hand. We love who you are, sweetheart. We just want you to be happy. I smiled, feeling a pang of genuine affection for this woman who wasn't really my mother, but who loved me unconditionally anyway. I am happy. Or I will be once the lab is completed. After brunch, I drove to my apartment, my mother's words echoing in my mind. Nathan's interest in Eliza had indeed intensified over the past months, evolving from professional curiosity to something more personal. He'd begun finding reasons to consult with me on the lab construction, inviting me to departmental events, suggesting coffee to discuss the scholarship selection process. It was all calculated, of course. Nathan Wells didn't do anything without calculation. But his motivations remained unclear. Was he genuinely attracted to Eliza Chen, wealthy philanthropist? Was he suspicious of my interest in Morgan Lee? Or was he simply keeping a potential threat close, trying to determine how much I knew or suspected? Whatever his reasons, his attention served my purposes. The closer he came, the more vulnerable he became. As I entered my apartment, my phone chimed with a text. Speak of the devil. Interesting development in the lab today. Something that might connect to Morgan's work. Dinner tonight to discuss? NW. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. After months of careful groundwork, was he finally taking the bait? Sounds intriguing. 8 p.m. at Luciano's? I guess his response came almost immediately. See you then. I smiled to myself. Luciano's was an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, public enough to be safe, private enough for sensitive conversation. A perfect setting for the next phase of my plan. Phase 3, confession. You look lovely, Nathan said as the maitre d' seated us at a corner table draped in crisp white linen. That color suits you. I smoothed the sapphire blue dress I'd chosen specifically for tonight. Elegant, but not overtly seductive. Thank you. You mentioned a development? He smiled, reaching for the wine list. Always straight to business. One of the things I admire about you, Eliza. He ordered an expensive bottle of red without consulting me, then leaned forward. But before we discuss the lab, there's something I've been curious about. Oh, I kept my expression neutral even as my instincts sharpened. Why Morgan Lee? His blue eyes studied me intently. Of all the scientists, all the causes you could support, why focus so intensely on an obscure grad student who died before you ever had your accident? Before you developed your interest in biochemistry? I'd anticipated this question, had been waiting for it, in fact. I told you, her research helped me understand. Yes, your brain injury, he interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. But that doesn't explain the level of devotion, the millions of dollars, the detailed knowledge of her work that goes beyond what's in her published papers. The waiter arrived with the wine, interrupting the tense exchange. After he'd gone through the ritual of presenting and pouring, Nathan raised his glass. To curiosity, he said, and the pursuit of truth. I clinked my glass against his, but didn't drink. Neither did he. Still don't trust me? He asked, setting down his untouched wine. Should I? I countered. He leaned back, studying me. I think we're both keeping secrets, Eliza, which makes trust complicated. I set down my own glass. What was the development you wanted to discuss? After a pause, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small flash drive, placing it on the table between us. I've been reviewing some of Morgan's earlier work, experiments she conducted before she focused on her thesis topic. There are similarities to your neurological symptoms post-accident, patterns that might explain your connection to her. I looked at the flash drive, then back to him. You've been investigating me? Researching, he corrected. It's what scientists do when confronted with an anomaly. And I'm an anomaly? Eliza Chen, wealthy socialite who survives a catastrophic car crash, develops an obsessive interest in an obscure deceased biochemist, and funds a multi-million-dollar lab in her name? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Yes, I'd call that anomalous. The waiter returned to take our dinner orders. I requested the risotto, Nathan the ossobuco. Once we were alone again, I leaned forward. What exactly are you suggesting, Nathan? He toyed with the flash drive. I'm not suggesting anything yet, but I find it curious that you know details about Morgan's work that weren't in her published papers. Details that were only in her private research notebooks. My heart skipped a beat. Perhaps Professor Alvarez shared those details. Alvarez doesn't have those notebooks, Nathan said flatly. They disappeared after Morgan's death. How unfortunate, I said, holding his gaze. I wonder where they might have gone. The tension between us was palpable, a high-wire act of insinuation and counter-insinuation. Nathan broke first, sliding the flash drive toward me. Take a look at this data, then perhaps we can have a more honest conversation. I pocketed the drive without looking at it. What would honesty look like between us, Nathan? He studied me for a long moment. It would start with you telling me who you really are and what you want. I think you know who I am, I said softly. I'm beginning to suspect, he acknowledged, though it seems impossible. Many things seem impossible until they happen. Our food arrived, a momentary reprieve from the intensity of our exchange. We both went through the motions of eating, though I doubt either of us tasted much. The Morgan Lee Memorial Laboratory will be completed next month, I said as we finished our meals. Construction is ahead of schedule. Yes, I received the update from Dean Winters. Nathan dabbed his mouth with his napkin. Your donation has been most impactful. That was the intention. I signaled for the check, and the dedication ceremony will proceed as planned, with you giving the keynote address about Morgan and her work. He set down his napkin, his expression hardening slightly. About that, I'm not sure I'm the appropriate person to speak about Morgan Lee. On the contrary, I said, my voice cooling. You knew her better than anyone. Worked closely with her. Were there the night she died? Nathan went very still. I wasn't there the night she died. She was alone in the parking lot. Was she? I held his gaze. Are you certain about that? The check arrived before he could respond. I placed my credit card on the tray before he could offer to pay. My treat. Consider it a thank you for your insights. As we waited for the server to return, Nathan leaned forward, his voice low. Who are you really, Eliza Chen? What do you want? I smiled, reclaiming my card and signing the receipt. I want justice, Nathan. Nothing more, nothing less. Justice, he repeated, his expression guarded. For whom? For Morgan Lee, I said, rising from the table. A brilliant scientist whose career was cut short, whose research was stolen, whose life was taken. He stood to face me, his height allowing him to look down into my eyes. Searching. Taken? Morgan died of natural causes, a cardiac event. Did she? I stepped closer, close enough to see the faint pulse pounding in his throat. Are you sure about that, Nathan? Absolutely sure no one else was there that night? That no one helped her heart stop beating? His face drained of color, but his voice remained steady. That's a serious accusation, Eliza. Some might even call it delusional. Some might, I agreed, but you and I know better, don't we? For a moment, we stood there in silent confrontation, the busy restaurant continuing around us, unaware of the deadly serious game being played at table 12. Review the data on the drive, Nathan finally said. Then call me. I think we have much more to discuss. Indeed we do, I said, turning to leave. Good night, Nathan. As I walked to my car, my hands trembled slightly, with fear, with anticipation, with the sheer surreality of confronting my murderer across a dinner table. The flash drive felt heavy in my pocket, a Trojan horse I had willingly accepted. But Nathan wasn't the only one with a plan, and tonight's exchange had confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Nathan Wells remembered exactly what he'd done to Morgan Lee, and now he was beginning to wonder if somehow, impossibly, she remembered too. The flash drive contained exactly what I'd expected, a trap. The files appeared to be research data, experimental protocols, neurochemical analyses. But embedded within them was sophisticated spyware designed to infiltrate any system where the drive was used and transmit information back to its creator. Fortunately, I'd anticipated this. Instead of plugging the drive into my own computer, I'd taken it to a cybersecurity specialist, a former hacker now running a legitimate security firm who asked no questions when presented with enough cash. Nasty piece of work, he'd confirmed after analyzing the drive in a secure environment. Would have given someone complete access to your system, files, emails, camera, microphone, everything. Can you trace it? I'd asked. Already did. He'd shown me the origin address, a server at Westlake University, specifically in the Department of Neuroscience. Nathan's department. Can you modify it? I'd asked next. Make it look like I accessed the files but prevent the actual spyware from functioning? The specialist had grinned. Better than that. I can create a false feedback loop, make it look like it's working, transmitting exactly the data you want them to see, while gathering information about whoever's monitoring it. And that's exactly what we'd done. For the past week, Nathan had been receiving carefully curated information from what he thought was my compromised computer. Emails to contractors about the lab construction, messages to my parents about mundane family matters, research into Morgan Lee that any interested donor might conduct. What he wasn't seeing were my real activities, my communications with Professor Alvarez's former graduate students, my deep dive into Nathan's research history, and most importantly, my meticulous preparation for the lab dedication ceremony now just 2 weeks away. Let him think he had the upper hand. Let him believe his technology had outsmarted me. It would make the final revelation all the more devastating. Miss Chen, there's a Detective Rivera here to see you. She says it's important. My assistant's voice over the intercom pulled me from the construction documents I'd been reviewing in my temporary office at Westlake. The Morgan Lee Memorial Laboratory was nearly complete, the state-of-the-art equipment being installed, the commemorative plaque ready to be unveiled. Send her in, I said, quickly closing the file on my computer. A detective? This was unexpected. The woman who entered was in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and an economical way of moving that suggested both athletic ability and careful observation. She wore a simple pantsuit and carried a small notebook. Miss Chen? I'm Detective Sophia Rivera, Edgewater Police Department. She showed me her badge. Thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Of course, I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. How can I help the police? She sat, studying me briefly before speaking. I understand you've been funding a new research laboratory here at Westlake, dedicated to a former graduate student named Morgan Lee. I kept my expression neutral despite the sudden acceleration of my pulse. That's correct. The dedication ceremony is in 2 weeks. And you've been working closely with Dr. Nathan Wells on this project? Dr. Wells' research space was relocated to accommodate the new lab, I said carefully. We've had professional interactions regarding the transition. Rivera nodded, making a brief note. Miss Chen, are you aware that Dr. Wells filed a complaint with our department yesterday? Regarding you? This was genuinely surprising. A complaint? On what grounds? Harassment, primarily. He claims you've been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, making veiled threats, and insinuating that he was somehow involved in Morgan Lee's death 2 years ago. She watched me closely. He provided emails, text messages, and recordings of conversations that he believes demonstrate your fixation on this theory. The spyware, the false data I'd allowed him to collect. He was using it exactly as I'd anticipated, trying to discredit me before I could expose him. Detective Rivera, I said, folding my hands on my desk, I've had nothing but professional interactions with Dr. Wells. If he's presented evidence suggesting otherwise, I would very much like to see it. He claims you believe you have some sort of connection to the deceased student, that you've repeatedly suggested Morgan Lee was murdered, not the victim of a natural cardiac event as the medical examiner determined. I maintained my composure. Detective, I never met Morgan Lee. I became interested in her research after my own accident, when her work helped me understand the neurological challenges I was facing. My donation is meant to honor her scientific contributions, nothing more. Rivera made another note. Dr. Wells suggests you may be suffering from a psychological condition related to your traumatic brain injury. Delusions, personality changes. He seems genuinely concerned. I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. I'm sure he does seem concerned. Dr. Wells is very good at seeming things. The detective's eyes sharpened. What do you mean by that? I considered my options carefully. This was an unexpected development, but perhaps it could work to my advantage. If Nathan was worried enough to involve the police, he was feeling threatened. Good. Detective, may I speak candidly? Please do. Dr. Wells is concerned, but not about my mental health. He's concerned because I've discovered something about his research that he'd prefer remain hidden. Rivera tilted her head slightly. And what might that be? I opened my desk drawer and removed a folder, sliding it across to her. These are publication records from Westlake's biochemistry department. The highlighted papers are Dr. Wells's work from the past 2 years after Morgan Lee's death. Compare them with these. I handed her another folder. Summaries of Morgan's unpublished research compiled by Professor Alvarez from the notes and partial lab books that remained after her death. The detective glanced through both folders, her expression neutral but interested. You're suggesting academic plagiarism? I'm suggesting that Dr. Wells has built his career on research he stole, I said carefully. Research that belonged to Morgan Lee. If you look at the methodologies, the experimental approaches, even some of the phrasing, it's too similar to be coincidental. Rivera closed both folders. Miss Chen, academic disputes, even allegations of plagiarism aren't police matters, they're university ethics issues. I'm well aware, I said, and I've raised these concerns with the university's Research Integrity Committee. But I mention it to explain why Dr. Wells might want to discredit me before these allegations can be properly investigated. So you deny making any suggestions that Dr. Wells was involved in Morgan Lee's death? I met her gaze directly. Detective Rivera, Morgan Lee died of sudden cardiac arrest at age 24. No autopsy was performed because the medical examiner ruled it natural causes, presumably an undiagnosed heart condition. But Morgan had no history of cardiac issues. She was an avid runner who had physicals every year. Don't you find that somewhat suspicious? Tragic, certainly, Rivera said. But young people with undiagnosed conditions die unexpectedly every year, without evidence suggesting foul play. There was no evidence because no one looked for any, I said, leaning forward. Morgan died alone in a parking lot at midnight. Her body wasn't found until the next morning. By then, any fast-acting compound would have metabolized completely. Compound? Rivera's eyebrow raised. You're suggesting poison? I'm suggesting it's worth investigating. I handed her a third folder. Morgan's research focused on neurochemical compounds that could cross the blood-brain barrier undetected. Compounds that could theoretically induce symptoms identical to cardiac arrest, yet leave no trace after a few hours. And you believe Dr. Wells used such a compound on Morgan Lee? Why? She caught him cheating on an exam, reported him. He was facing academic probation, loss of his scholarship until she conveniently died, and suddenly there was no witness against him. Rivera studied me for a long moment. Miss Chen, these are extremely serious allegations based on what appears to be circumstantial evidence at best. Dr. Wells is a respected researcher with no criminal record. I understand how it sounds, I admitted, but I believe the evidence exists if someone were willing to look for it. The detective gathered the folders I'd given her. I'll review these materials, not because I find your theory particularly credible, but because all claims should be investigated thoroughly. That's all I ask, I said, relieved that she was at least taking the information. Rivera stood to leave but paused at the door. One more question, Miss Chen. What's your real interest in this case? You never knew Morgan Lee. Why invest millions in her memory and spend so much energy investigating her death? I had prepared for this question, had rehearsed my answer countless times. Yet in that moment, facing this perceptive detective, the truth rose to my lips before I could stop it. Because I was given a second chance, I said softly, and Morgan wasn't. Rivera nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. I'll be in touch, Miss Chen. In the meantime, I would advise you to maintain a professional distance from Dr. Wells. After she left, I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. This was an unexpected turn. Nathan going to the police, trying to paint me as a delusional stalker. But perhaps it could work in my favor. If Rivera was thorough, if she looked into Morgan's death with fresh eyes. My phone chimed with a text message. I see you had a visitor. Police involvement wasn't necessary, Eliza. We could have resolved this privately. NW. So he was watching my office. Probably had someone in the department keeping tabs on me. I typed back, nothing to resolve, Nathan. Just answering the detective's questions honestly. As I'm sure you did. His reply came almost instantly. This path you're on leads nowhere good for either of us. Meet me tonight at my lab, 8 p.m. Let's end this. I stared at the message, considering my options. Meeting him alone in his lab was risky, potentially dangerous. But it might also be the opportunity I'd been waiting for, a chance to record a confession, to get him to incriminate himself. I'll be there, I replied, and yes, let's end this. Nathan's lab was dimly lit when I arrived, most of the overhead fluorescents switched off. Just a few task lamps creating pools of light at various workstations. His graduate students were gone. He'd probably sent them home early. Eliza. He stepped out from his private office at the back, looking tired but composed. Thank you for coming. You didn't leave me much choice, I said, remaining near the door. Involving the police was unnecessary. Was it? He gestured for me to follow him toward his office. You've been making increasingly pointed accusations. Contacting my colleagues, questioning my research, I felt threatened. Threatened, I repeated, following him but maintaining a careful distance. That's ironic. His private office was better lit than the main lab, the desk lamp casting a warm glow over the polished surface where several folders lay neatly arranged. A glass of what looked like whiskey sat beside them. Please sit, he said, indicating the chair across from his desk as he settled into his own. Would you like a drink? I have a decent scotch. No, thank you. I remained standing. What is it you want, Nathan? He sighed, rubbing his temples. What I want is to understand, to make sense of whatever this is. He gestured between us. At first, I thought you were just another wealthy dilettante with a pet cause. Then I thought perhaps you had some personal connection to Morgan I wasn't aware of. But now? I prompted when he trailed off. He looked up at me, his blue eyes searching. Now I'm considering possibilities that should be impossible. Things that can't be rationally explained? Such as? Instead of answering directly, he opened one of the folders on his desk. Your medical records from after your accident. Extensive traumatic brain injury, particularly to the frontal and temporal lobes. Areas associated with personality, memory, identity. I stiffened. How did you get my medical records? That's a violation of privacy laws. I have colleagues at Eastridge Medical Center, he said dismissively. But that's hardly the point. The point is, the damage to your brain was severe. The doctors were surprised you survived at all, let alone retained cognitive function. I fail to see. And then there's this. He opened another folder, Morgan Lee's autopsy report. My breath caught. There was no autopsy. The medical examiner ruled natural causes. There was no official autopsy, he corrected. But I had access to the body before it was released to the funeral home. I took samples, ran my own tests. The casual way he described violating Morgan's corpse sent a wave of revulsion through me. You had no right. I had every right, he snapped, a flash of the real Nathan breaking through his controlled facade. I needed to confirm my work was successful, that the compound was truly untraceable. There it was, a confession. If only I'd been recording, but Nathan wasn't finished. He opened a third folder, removing what looked like brain scan images. These are your brain scans, Eliza, or should I say Morgan? I froze, the air suddenly heavy in my lungs. What did you call me? It's impossible, he continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Scientifically, medically, logically impossible. And yet, he spread the images across his desk. The human consciousness is still largely a mystery to us. Neural networks, electrical patterns, the physical substrate of what we call the self. Nathan, I said carefully, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. Perhaps we should call someone. Stop. His voice was sharp. Stop pretending. I know who you are, Morgan. I don't know how, but it's you. Your consciousness somehow transferred, embedded in Eliza Chen's damaged brain when her own was compromised by trauma. The room seemed to tilt around me. After years of careful planning, of maintaining my cover, of building my case against him, he'd figured it out on his own. That's absurd, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Is it? Nathan stood, moving around the desk toward me. You know details about Morgan's research that were never published. You focus on the exact lab where she died. You look at me with her eyes, with hatred and accusation. It is you, isn't it? I backed away from him toward the door. You're having a psychotic episode, Nathan. You're imagining things because you feel guilty about stealing Morgan's research after she died. After I killed her, he corrected, his tone eerily calm. But you already knew that, didn't you? Because you were there. You were her. For a heartbeat, we stared at each other, predator and prey, killer and victim, locked in an impossible confrontation across death itself. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, reaching for the door handle behind me. But Nathan was faster, slamming his hand against the door to keep it closed. Don't lie to me, he hissed, his face inches from mine. Not after everything. Not after I've spent months trying to understand how this could be possible. What's happening? I could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the desperation in his eyes. This wasn't the calculated, controlled Nathan who had so carefully murdered Morgan and built his career on her work. This was a man coming undone. You're right, I said softly, making a split-second decision. It's me, Morgan. His eyes widened, his breath catching. How? How is this possible? I don't know, I answered truthfully. I died in that parking lot. You killed me. And then I woke up in Eliza's body with both sets of memories, both lives. Nathan stumbled back slightly as if the confirmation had physically struck him. That's impossible. Says the man who just declared it to be true, I pointed out. You figured it out, Nathan. Congratulations. Now what? He ran a hand through his hair, visibly struggling to process. I need to understand the mechanism, the neurological pathway. This could be groundbreaking research. Research, I laughed incredulously. That's your reaction? Not remorse for murdering me, but excitement about studying how my consciousness survived? Don't you see? His eyes gleamed with manic intensity. This changes everything we know about consciousness, about the self, about death itself. We could publish, I cut him off, along with your confession of murder? I don't think so. His expression hardened. No one would believe you. There's no evidence linking me to Morgan's death. The compound I used metabolized completely within hours. There's evidence now, I said. You just confessed, Nathan, to me. Your word against mine, he said with a shrug. And given your medical history of traumatic brain injury, your claims about being Morgan Lee reincarnated. Well, who do you think they'll believe? The respected neurologist or the delusional heiress? He was right, and we both knew it. Without hard evidence, without a recording or a witness, it was just my word against his. And with my delusions about being Morgan Reborn, anything I said would be dismissed. So where does that leave us? I asked. Nathan's expression softened, becoming almost conciliatory. It leaves us with an extraordinary opportunity, Morgan. Or Eliza, or whoever you are now. He moved back behind his desk. Think about it. We could work together, study this phenomenon. Your experience could advance neuroscience by decades. Work with my murderer? I said incredulously. Are you insane? I'm pragmatic, he countered. What happened to Morgan was regrettable. A moment of panic, of self-preservation. But that's in the past. You stole her life, her research, her future. And now I'm offering to help understand how her consciousness survived, he said, as if this made everything acceptable. Isn't that worth setting aside our differences? I stared at him, truly seeing the depths of his narcissism, his complete moral vacuum. Nathan Wells hadn't changed. The same calculation, the same ruthless self-interest that had led him to murder Morgan Lee was now leading him to try to exploit the impossible miracle of her return. You haven't changed at all, I said softly. Still taking what isn't yours. Still seeing people as means to your ends. His jaw tightened. This attitude isn't productive, Morgan. Consider your position carefully. If you persist with these accusations, I'll have no choice but to defend myself. And as I've pointed out, your credibility is compromised. Because I claim to be a dead woman reborn in another body, I acknowledged. An impossible claim by any scientific standard. Precisely, he smiled thinly. So we return to my proposal. Work with me. Let me study this phenomenon. Together, we could make history. I pretended to consider buying time. And if I refuse? His smile disappeared. Then I'll be forced to protect myself. To ensure you're seen as exactly what you appear to be. A mentally unstable woman with delusions stemming from traumatic brain injury. I see. I reached for my bag, which I'd set on the floor by the door. I'll need time to think about this. Of course, he said magnanimously. Take a day, but no longer. The lab dedication is next week, and I need to know where we stand before then. As I opened the door to leave, he called after me. And Morgan, don't do anything rash. Remember, I've done this before. Getting away with it becomes easier the second time. The threat lingered in the air as I walked out, my legs steady though my mind was racing. Nathan had confirmed everything, the murder, the stolen research, his complete lack of remorse. But he was right about one thing. Without evidence, it was just my word against his. And my word, coming from someone claiming to be a dead woman's consciousness in another body, wouldn't hold much weight. I needed proof, definitive, irrefutable proof of what Nathan had done. And I had exactly 1 week to get it. You recorded your conversation with Dr. Wells? Detective Rivera's expression was a mixture of surprise and professional interest. Without his knowledge or consent, we sat in her sparsely furnished office at the Edgewater Police Department headquarters, a cup of untouched coffee cooling on the desk between us. I did, I confirmed, sliding the small digital recorder across to her, which I realize may not be admissible in court, but it's not, she interrupted, though she picked up the device. Edgewater is in a two-party consent state for recordings. This would be inadmissible as evidence. My heart sank. But you'll at least listen to it? He confesses to killing Morgan Lee, to stealing her research, to threatening me. Rivera studied me for a long moment before nodding once. I'll listen. But Miss Chen, even if what you say is true, without admissible evidence, we can't arrest Dr. Wells. I understand, I said, though frustration burned in my chest. But knowing what he did, what he's capable of, doesn't that change things? Justify reopening the investigation into Morgan's death? Potentially, she conceded. But we'd need something solid to go on. Physical evidence, witnesses. Something that would stand up in court. I leaned forward. What about Morgan's research notebooks? The ones that went missing after her death? If we could prove Nathan took them, stole her intellectual property. That would be theft, possibly academic fraud, but not murder, Rivera pointed out. And after 2 years, finding those notebooks would be challenging to say the least. What if I told you I know exactly where they are? The detective's eyebrow raised fractionally. Do you? In Nathan's private lab office, I said with certainty, on a shelf with his other research notebooks. I saw them when I visited his lab last month. 3 unmarked volumes that he claimed were reference materials when I asked about them. Even if you're right, we would need a warrant to search his office. And to get a warrant, we need probable cause. Your inadmissible recording and suspicious notebooks aren't enough. I sat back, momentarily defeated. Then a thought occurred to me. What about the Morgan Lee Memorial Laboratory dedication ceremony? It's in 5 days. Nathan is scheduled to give the keynote address. Everyone will be there, university administration, faculty, students, donors. If we could somehow get him to confess publicly. Rivera shook her head. Miss Chen, entrapment isn't a viable. Not entrapment, I clarified quickly. But what if we use the ceremony itself? The culmination of everything I've been working toward, the perfect stage for Nathan to either redeem himself or hang himself with his own words. The detective looked skeptical, but she didn't immediately dismiss the idea. What exactly are you proposing? I smiled, the pieces falling into place. A revelation, one that Nathan won't be able to ignore or deny, but I'll need your help and your trust. For several long moments, Rivera considered me, her experienced eyes searching for deception, for instability, for anything that might suggest my incredible story was the product of a damaged mind rather than a terrible truth. You really believe you're Morgan Lee, don't you? She finally asked, her voice neutral, neither judging nor dismissive. I have Morgan's memories, her knowledge, her sense of self, I said carefully. Whether that makes me Morgan in Eliza's body, or Eliza with Morgan's memories, or some new amalgamation of both. I don't know, but I know Nathan Wells murdered Morgan Lee, and he needs to be held accountable. Rivera nodded slowly. All right, Miss Chen, tell me your plan. The Morgan Lee Memorial Laboratory gleamed under the bright lights, a monument to scientific advancement and philanthropic generosity. The renovated space bore little resemblance to the utilitarian lab where Morgan had worked and died. Now it featured cutting-edge equipment, ergonomic workstations, and a wall of windows overlooking the campus. The dedication ceremony was being held in the spacious atrium of the Hadley Science Center, with the new lab itself, just down the corridor, set up for tours following the formal proceedings. Nearly 200 people had gathered. University administrators, faculty, students, donors, local dignitaries, and members of the press. My parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride at their daughter's generosity. And there, on the stage with Dean Winters and other university officials, sat Nathan Wells, looking appropriately solemn in a charcoal suit. Our eyes met briefly as I took my seat, his expression unreadable. We hadn't spoken since our confrontation in his lab 5 days earlier. I hadn't responded to his texts asking for my decision about his proposal. Let him wonder, let him worry. The uncertainty would make him more vulnerable. Dean Winters approached the podium, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. Good evening, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, and friends. Tonight we gather to celebrate a remarkable gift to Westlake University. A gift that honors the legacy of a brilliant young scientist taken from us too soon, while creating opportunities for the next generation of biochemical researchers. She continued with practiced eloquence, outlining Morgan Lee's contributions to the field, the specifications of the new laboratory, and the scholarship program that would bear her name. Throughout, I sat perfectly still, my focus divided between her words and the subtle reactions of Nathan, who maintained his composed facade with the skill of a practiced actor. And now, Dean Winters concluded, I am honored to introduce the man who will be overseeing much of the research in collaboration with the new Morgan Lee Laboratory, a colleague who worked closely with Morgan during her time at Westlake, Dr. Nathan Wells. Polite applause filled the atrium as Nathan rose and approached the podium. He adjusted the microphone, his movements deliberate, controlled. Thank you, Dean Winters, and good evening to all. It is both an honor and a solemn responsibility to speak about Morgan Lee and the legacy her work continues to inspire. His voice was steady, authoritative, the voice of a respected academic addressing peers. I watched him carefully, noting the subtle tells visible only to someone who knew what to look for. The slight tightness around his eyes, the too precise enunciation that betrayed his tension. Morgan Lee was, without question, one of the most promising young scientists I have had the privilege to know, he continued. Her innovative approach to neurochemical research, her methodical experimentation, her brilliant insights, all suggested a career that would have transformed our understanding of how the brain processes and responds to chemical interventions. He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience before landing briefly on me. Her untimely death was a tragedy, not only for those who knew and cared for her, but for the scientific community as a whole. The questions she was beginning to answer, the pathways she was exploring, so much potential, unfulfilled. The irony of these words coming from her murderer made my stomach clench, but I maintained my composed expression. Everything hinged on what came next. Which is why I am particularly grateful to Miss Eliza Chen, Nathan continued, gesturing toward me, for her extraordinary generosity in creating this laboratory and scholarship program. Through her vision and commitment, Morgan Lee's work will continue, her legacy secured for generations to come. More applause, including from my parents, who smiled at me proudly. In a very real sense, Nathan said, his voice taking on a philosophical tone, this is a form of immortality. While Morgan herself is gone, her ideas, her methodology, her scientific approach lives on, both in this laboratory and in the research that has built upon her foundational work. Including yours, I thought grimly, built upon her stolen notebooks, her stolen life. As someone who worked closely with Morgan, who understood and appreciated the significance of her research, I am particularly honored to be associated with this new laboratory. In fact, much of my own recent work has been influenced by the questions Morgan was beginning to explore before her passing. He was getting dangerously close to admitting his theft, even if cloaked in academic euphemism. I glanced to the back of the room where Detective Rivera stood against the wall, watching intently. And so, Nathan concluded, it is with profound gratitude that I accept the responsibility of helping to guide the initial research directions of the Morgan Lee Memorial Laboratory. I believe Morgan would be pleased to know that her work continues, that her questions are being answered, that her scientific legacy endures. Thank you. More applause as Nathan returned to his seat, looking satisfied. He had managed to associate himself with Morgan's legacy without revealing his crimes, positioning himself as the natural inheritor of her scientific mantle rather than its thief. Dean Winters returned to the podium. Thank you, Dr. Wells, for those moving reflections. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the woman who has made all of this possible, whose remarkable generosity will transform biochemical research at Westlake for decades to come, Ms. Eliza Chen. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. I rose, smoothing the skirt of my elegant black dress, and walked deliberately to the podium. As I turned to face the audience, I could feel Nathan watching me, wary but still confident in his control of the situation. Thank you, Dean Winters, and good evening, everyone. It is truly moving to see so many people gathered to honor Morgan Lee's memory and celebrate the continuation of her important work. I paused, taking a slow breath. As many of you know, my interest in biochemistry and neuroscience began after my own traumatic brain injury 3 years ago. That injury changed me in ways I'm still discovering, altering not just my physical capabilities, but my perceptions, my interests, my very sense of self. From the corner of my eye, I could see Nathan tensing slightly, unsure where I was going with this. During my recovery, I became fascinated with the biochemistry of the brain, particularly the work of a promising young researcher named Morgan Lee, whose papers helped me understand the changes happening in my own mind. I turned slightly, gesturing toward the corridor that led to the new laboratory. The Morgan Lee Memorial Laboratory represents more than just a state-of-the-art research facility. It represents justice, continuity, the understanding that while a life may end, knowledge endures. Nathan was watching me intently now, his posture rigid. I met his gaze directly as I continued, which is why I'm particularly pleased to announce a surprise addition to the laboratory's resources, one that Dr. Wells was not aware would be part of today's ceremony. Confusion flickered across his face. 3 days ago, after extensive negotiations with Morgan Lee's family, I acquired her personal effects, items that had been in storage since her death. Among those items were digital backups of her research data, including complete copies of her laboratory notebooks that went missing after her death. Nathan went completely still, the blood draining from his face. These notebooks, which contain detailed records of Morgan's experiments, methodologies, and findings, will now be available to all researchers using the new laboratory, ensuring that her work truly can be continued as she intended. Murmurs of interest rippled through the audience. Most saw this only as an academic windfall, original research materials, thought lost, now recovered. But Nathan understood the true implication. With those notebooks recovered, his theft could be proven. The parallels between Morgan's work and his subsequent innovations would be impossible to explain away. In fact, I continued, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me, I've taken the liberty of having those notebooks professionally analyzed, comparing Morgan's original research with publications that followed her death. The findings are illuminating. I glanced at Detective Rivera, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Right on cue, university security personnel appeared at the side exits of the atrium, their presence subtle but unmistakable. These findings have been shared with both Westlake's Research Integrity Committee and the Edgewater Police Department, I announced, watching as Nathan's composed facade finally began to crack. It seems that Morgan Lee's work didn't just influence subsequent research. In some cases, it appears to have been directly appropriated without attribution. Gasps and whispers spread through the audience as the implication became clear. Dean Winters looked stunned, glancing between me and Nathan with growing alarm. "Miss Chen," she began, rising from her seat, "this is hardly the venue for such accusations." "I agree," I said firmly, "which is why I've arranged for a private meeting immediately following this ceremony, where the evidence can be reviewed by university administration and proper authorities." I turned to Nathan. "Dr. Wells, your presence will be required." Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is absurd, defamatory. Miss Chen clearly remains affected by her traumatic brain injury, fabricating connections and conspiracies where none exist." "The notebooks aren't fabricated, Dr. Wells," I said calmly. "Neither are the timestamps on the digital files, the metadata that proves when they were created, well before your supposedly original publications covering the same material." A flash of desperation crossed his face. "Even if such notebooks exist, they prove nothing beyond academic influence, a natural progression of ideas." "Perhaps," I conceded, "but they might also explain why you were so interested in Morgan's research that you were in the parking lot with her the night she died." Dead silence fell over the atrium. This was the accusation we'd been building toward. The suggestion that Nathan had not only stolen Morgan's research, but had been present at her death. "That's a lie," Nathan said, his voice dangerously low. "I was nowhere near the science center that night." "The security cameras suggest otherwise," I said, though this was a calculated bluff. The actual footage from that night had been erased long ago, but Nathan didn't know that. Footage that has been enhanced using new techniques, showing two figures in the parking lot during the time frame when Morgan collapsed. Nathan's composure slipped further, his breathing becoming visibly irregular. "This is absurd, a personal vendetta based on delusions." "If they're delusions," I interrupted, "then you have nothing to worry about. The evidence will clear you. Unless, of course, there's something you'd like to tell us now about Morgan's research? About that night?" For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. I could see the calculations running behind Nathan's eyes, weighing his options, considering his escape routes, evaluating how much I actually knew versus what I was bluffing about. "Morgan died of natural causes," he finally said, his voice wooden. "A cardiac event. The medical examiner confirmed it." "Because no one looked for anything else," I countered. "No one suspected that a brilliant neuropharmacologist might have created a compound designed to mimic a natural cardiac event. A compound that would metabolize completely within hours, leaving no trace." His eyes widened fractionally. I had just described his murder method with perfect accuracy. "A compound," I continued relentlessly, "that might be detailed in those missing notebooks. The same notebooks that contain the research you've been passing off as your own for the past 2 years. Dean Winters stepped forward, her face pale with shock. "Dr. Wells, these accusations are extremely serious. If Miss Chen has indeed recovered Morgan Lee's notebooks and they support these claims—" "They don't exist," Nathan suddenly shouted, his careful facade finally cracking completely. "The notebooks were destroyed. I made sure of it." The silence that followed his outburst was absolute. He seemed to realize what he'd admitted, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking escape. "You destroyed evidence of Morgan's research?" Dean Winters asked, her voice faint with disbelief. Nathan's expression hardened, his moment of panic replaced by a cold calculation. "This is a setup," he said, his voice steadier. "Miss Chen has been stalking me, harassing me, making increasingly bizarre claims. Now she's trying to destroy my reputation with fabricated evidence and forced confessions. None of it will stand up to scrutiny." He turned to face me directly. Tell them, Eliza. Tell them who you really think you are. This was the moment I'd feared, when he would try to discredit me by revealing my delusion that I was Morgan Lee reborn. It would make everything else I'd said seem like the product of a damaged mind, regardless of the evidence. But I was prepared. I know exactly who I am, Nathan, I said calmly. I'm the person who's going to see justice done for Morgan Lee. I turned to address the stunned audience. Dr. Wells believes I think I'm Morgan Lee reincarnated, a delusion he's been encouraging to discredit me when I finally went public with evidence of his academic theft. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Detective Rivera had moved closer to the stage, her attention fixed on Nathan. But the truth is much simpler, I continued. I became interested in Morgan's case because of similarities between compounds described in her publicly available research and compounds mentioned in my own medical file, experimental treatments used during my coma after the accident. This was the cover story Rivera and I had crafted. Plausible, impossible to disprove, and far more credible than the actual truth. When I began looking into her work more deeply, I discovered discrepancies that led me to suspect both intellectual theft and something worse. I met Nathan's gaze directly. And now Dr. Wells has just confirmed that he deliberately destroyed Morgan's notebooks that would have proven his subsequent research was stolen from her. Nathan's eyes darted around the room, calculating his dwindling options. This proves nothing about the night Morgan died. Nothing. Actually, Detective Rivera said, stepping forward and displaying her badge. Your statement that you made sure the notebooks were destroyed constitutes admission of evidence tampering, a criminal offense. Combined with Miss Chen's formal complaint and the new evidence regarding the misappropriation of research, we have grounds to bring you in for questioning, Dr. Wells. Two uniformed officers had appeared beside Rivera, their presence making the situation's seriousness clear to everyone in the room. Nathan looked from Rivera to me, his expression shifting from calculation to raw anger. You planned this, he said softly. All of it. The donation, the lab, this ceremony. It was all to trap me. Justice isn't a trap, Nathan, I replied, equally soft. It's a reckoning. For a moment, I thought he might lunge at me, the mask of civility completely gone, replaced by the same cold fury I'd seen in his eyes the night he killed Morgan. But with officers approaching and nowhere to run, he visibly forced himself back under control. This is a mistake, he said to Rivera, his voice regaining some of its professional authority. A misunderstanding that will be cleared up as soon as we review the actual evidence, not Miss Chen's interpretations of it. You'll have that opportunity, Rivera assured him, downtown at the station. As the officers escorted Nathan from the atrium, a shocked silence hung over the assembled guests. Dean Winters looked shell-shocked, my parents confused and concerned, the gathered academics and donors uncertain whether they'd just witnessed an act of justice or a character assassination.